actually for Commander Solana-Sodeinde, as well as Dr. Mueller. The first is, if excipient X is not available in the IID database, and it is used in an FDA-approved ANDAs for the same route of administration and dosage form, how can I seek advice about using that excipient in a future ANDA?
Sure, great question. In that case, I would recommend submitting a controlled correspondence for input.
Excellent. Short and sweet there. So we'll go ahead and give you another one, Dr. Mueller. For non-dose proportional strengths, should the MDE be calculated using a mathematical worst-case pill burden of low-strength units, or will the agency accept a calculation based on the highest strength until that reaches the MDD, especially if the mathematical maximum is clinically unrealistic, such as more than 20 tablets per day?
Is the question about calculation of the maximum daily exposure to excipients? That was like at the very beginning. Okay, great. It depends. So we don't actually have a cutoff of 20 pills per day or 20 dose units. So I think submitting a controlled correspondence for specific input is probably the best route to go. I cannot provide a standard default answer.
Excellent. Thank you for that response. My next question will be for Dr. Solana-Sodeinde. Can I use the UNII code to connect the name of my excipient with what is listed in the IID database?
Yes. Short answer to that, yes. Yeah, that's it, because we actually search for our excipients internally like that. We use the Unicode. So if you do have an excipient and they have different grades or forms, you're definitely welcome to use the Unicode in there. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Next question is for Dr. Liang. What are the exceptions in terms of setting diastereomic composition acceptance criteria for sameness evaluation or routine controls?
Thank you for the excellent question. It's actually a tough question. So first of all, acceptance criteria is a review issue, and the adequacy of those proposals would be determined during the full ANDA review. So in terms of the sameness for diastereomers, there are two kind of difficulties in here. So for siRNAs, I mean, as I presented during the presentation, the number of diastereomers is small. So you could separate each single diastereomers, it's quite possible. So in that case, it may be very simple because you can compare the individual diastereomers with that of the ROD and find out the ROD availability and propose some controls, acceptance criteria, and also demonstrate the sameness. Now, as of today, none of the approved oligonucleotide drugs in their labeling specify a particular diastereomers as the active ingredient, at least not so far. So any diastereomers, I mean the full target molecule diastereomers, would be, if you find it in the RD, would be considered part of the active ingredient. So you would have to match those levels. So because each individual diastereomers is considered part of the API, so you could probably apply those concepts for the assay for each individual diastereomers. So for example, you can set at plus or minus 10% or 90 to 110% of the RD value, the average RD value. That's based on the assay concept. So you control each individual diastereomer that way. That may be easier to justify. Now, it is more complex for ASOs, which has a lot of diastereomers, and you cannot separate single diastereomers. And what you get is the profile. So it's very complex, as I shown earlier. Those analytical methods may not be sensitive to all different, same kind of level, sensitivity level to all different kind of composition changes. So there's a risk there. I mean, even there's no change in the profile, it doesn't mean that there's no change in the composition. So you would need to use multiple methods, and it gets a little bit more complex. So I would highly recommend that you engage the agency further, either in a pre-end product development meeting request or some kind of control correspondences. So, thank you.
Thank you for that response. My next question is also for you, Dr. Liang. Are there any plans for platform-level guidance for oligonucleotides like ASO, siRNA, apart from PSGs in the future?
Yeah, I would direct this question to OPQA or OGD, I mean, the policy group, probably. So, thank you.
Of course, thank you for that. My next two questions will be for Commander Solana-Sodeinde as well as Dr. Mueller. Are MDDs for drugs listed in any publicly available database?
That's a great question. There is no publicly available database that lists MDDs for drugs. Not at this moment. So if there are any questions for a specific drug, submit a controlled correspondence.
Excellent. Thank you for that response. And Dr. Mueller, your next question. For the purposes of calculating residual solvents in an oral solid dosage form, and the maximum daily dose is presented in the labeling as milligrams per kilograms per day, what should be used for the kilogram? If the PI indicates a higher than the standard range of weight, does the higher weight need to be used in the MDD?
So I'm gonna go out on a limb and make an assumption that it depends. If the patient population is not inherently obese, let's say it's not a drug product to control for glycemic control, for example, and the patient would be considered standard weight, then the 60 kilogram could be used. However, if it's a drug where the patient population would significantly fall out of the standard range, meaning either obese or very low weight, then you have to go by. I would recommend going by the clinical disease state. What's more typical for the clinical disease state? Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Commander Solana-Sodeinde. What are some limitations of the inactive ingredient database, or IID?
Of course. Yeah, like I initially mentioned, it doesn't present the context of use or the duration of use. And that's just a limitation, and because it's associated with the products, so we have to be very careful what we do publish. The IID also doesn't have information, because we've received some questions sometimes about excipients in biologics or in over-the-counter medications, and we do not publish those excipients in there. So we'll just reserve the IID for new drug applications and approved abbreviated new drug applications, the generic drugs. Let's see, what else? Other limitations. One thing I can say is we do always get suggestions and, about enhancing our IID. So I do encourage people and industry to submit their questions because we do take that into considerations. We have a lot of discussions behind closed doors internally. And so, for instance, we've heard about populations considering like the pediatrics. So we've heard that, and we're just making some discussions about that. So that's what we welcome. That's all I have to say about the limitations. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We do have one brave soul who wants to have lunch today with a question in-house. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, question is for Diana. Regarding the IID, I saw you had a slide on the, I guess, evolution of the percent of MDE that's been updated. It went from 4 to 44%. So good job there, I guess. Is there a target that you're looking to achieve in the percentage? Is there a goal and a time frame to achieve that? Just curious about that.
It's a very good question. Thank you so much for that. Yes, it'll be nice to say, in an absolute format, 100%, right? But we want to shoot for at least 70% plus. So that's why we have a lot of enhancements going on to our systems. We're trying to modernize them as well and use different IT systems. So slowly but surely, but we are optimistic. We are working behind the scenes really hard so that we can get as many MDEs completed for industry to use when, manufacturing their products. Yes. Thank you so much.
Is there any time frame that you're shooting for? I know it's probably behind.
It depends. It depends. I can't really give a set timeline. Trust me, we're working hard and we are ambitious. However, there are lots of factors to consider, but we have you in mind. Yeah. So thank you. That's as much as I can provide. Yep.
Thank you
Stay
much.
tuned. Yep.
Second question from the House. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Rebecca Dandecker, Wiley Ryan Law Firm. I noticed that on the slides, you give information about reaching out to the IID team, mostly through controlled correspondence, but you also provided the direct email.
Yes,
Can you
ma'am.
clarify when we should use that direct email? Because it seems like controlled correspondence is the default.
Yes, actually, for us, the default is the IID update mailbox. So it's for general. We get a lot of general inquiries, just everyone asking, I noticed this specific excipient level. I just want to, ask, is it correct or is it possible is that, or I noticed something was on there and it was replaced. Can you provide a rationale? The ones, as it relates to the IID, right, and the excipients, anything that is related to an application specific. So we've had, a few maybe requesters that will ask us questions, and it's a general question, starts out as that, but they want a specific answer, more tied or customized for their own application because maybe the manufacturer is manufacturing an excipient for a specific drug product application. And in those situations, we say, yes, go through the control correspond route, because then we really route those questions to the specific subject matter experts that can do more digging and more research for the specific application and then respond to the requester that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, we'll give our House people a chance as long as they want to come up to the mic.
Because everyone loves IID, I figured I might as well.
Okay.
Candace Edwards from Intentus Strategic Regulatory Consulting.
Yes, ma'am.
So if a client has done a meeting, let's say a meeting, and in that meeting, as part of the development meeting, is asked an IID question, will it get the same level of review and as opposed to if you do a direct control correspondence? So will you get the answer, or do you need to have that control correspondence?
No, you don't necessarily have to have
Okay,
that.
so it can be addressed.
It can be addressed
in a
as
meeting.
long as it's not tied to a specific application. Then we have to go through the control correspondence route. But if it's just a general question,
No, it would be specific, so it would.
Oh, it would be specific?
Yeah, development meeting for a product.
Yes,
That might
yes,
include a
yes,
question.
yes, yes.
You would still get the same level of review as if you
Yes.
just, okay.
yes,
Thank
you
you.
would. In fact, you might even get a more intense review because it's a controlled,
'Cause it's-
and it has a clock on it, 60 days. We have clocks also for it. We have timelines for the general inquiries, it's 30 days, but with the controlled, it's more targeted. So you should be able to get a response within 60 days.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, Corey, back to online. We have 5 more minutes.
Of course, then our next question will be for you, Dr. Liang. What should be the reporting threshold for any unspecified impurity in oligonucleotides, given that the FDA has not provided specific guidance? FDA has published guidance for peptides. can the same limit of NMT 0.10% for unspecified impurities be considered for oligonucleotides?
So the reporting threshold should be lower than, typically should be lower than the identification threshold. So there's a relationship there. However, for the identification threshold, it's a case-by-case basis at this point. And the FDA has not published a guidance on setting those thresholds yet. So I think once you determine the identification threshold, of course, with a lot of assessment, risk assessments and justification, and then you can set your reporting threshold lower than that. And of course, the reporting threshold has something to do with your method sensitivity. For example, the LOQ and all those kinds of things. So you can propose something and justify it, and then we'll review it case by case. So.
Excellent, thank you. And our next question is also going to be for you, Dr. Liang. Is it acceptable to use one method for routine testing of diastereomeric composition?
Good question. So it really depends on whether that method is capable of accurately determining and sensitively determining the composition and also sensitivity composition changes. If that is not the case, then multiple methods may be required, and whether that's the same as testing or routine testing. Now, there's a possibility that after you get the approval and after you get enough information or data to support that method is sensitive to these changes, and you have demonstrated consistency of your manufacturing, and sounds like your quality is stable. Then post-approval, you may propose something to change. Maybe reduce or eliminate one of the many tests. So it is possible, but that should happen post-approval.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we have time for at least one more question. So this one will be for Dr. Mueller. How should drugs that are not applied on a daily basis, but rather weekly, monthly, or at longer defined intervals be addressed from the MDD perspective?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. Generally, we apply the amount administered within 1 day, even if the drug itself is administered in intervals. So what is administered that day? For example, transdermal systems, you apply a transdermal assistant on Monday. That is considered your maximum daily dose, even if the system stays on for 5 days. And the reason is that we evaluate not just, so we're actually not looking so much towards the API, but we're looking at residual solvents, extractable leachables, excipients, impurities. So, and we do not have time release information available for either of those attributes generally. So therefore, worst case scenario, we apply all goes in at once, which is the day the drug is administered. Great question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to speakers and panelists. Thank you so much for coming out. Thanks, Lori.